In the early morning hours of March 11th, 1989, four young men, they arrived in the beautiful resort town of South Padre Island, which is just off the coast of southern Texas. They were there to enjoy their spring break, and they decided they would go into Mexico and party there. And they drove an hour southwest to Brownsville, Texas, which is a town that sits right on the border of Mexico, and then walked right over the footbridge that crossed the Rio Grande River. They found themselves in the town of Matamoros, and then they made their way into the bars and the clubs. They got tired and left the bar scene. They decided they had so much fun in Matamoros the night before that they had to go back. And then all night they partied and danced and had a great time. It was so crowded in Matamoros, and so the foursome split into two separate pairs. And the lead pair, they made their way ahead and they stopped at the gift shop going back to the US side. The trail pair, which consisted of Mark Kilroy and Bill Huddleston, they got sidetracked when Mark saw a girl, and while Mark is talking to her, Bill goes down an alleyway to urinate. And then when he comes back out, Mark and this girl are not there. Bill makes his way up to the bridge and he meets up with the other two friends. They eventually convince themselves that he must have just left with this girl. They get to their hotel room and Mark's not there. But the next morning, when Mark still had not come back to the hotel room, they file a missing person report. 3 weeks later, a drug smuggler drove through a police checkpoint without stopping just outside of Matamoros. And so the police pursued him, and this guy ultimately stopped at this secluded ranch up in the mountains. They noticed a ranch worker was standing nearby. They showed him a picture of Mark. He said to police, "Yeah, I have seen him here. The smuggler and his friends, they brought him here, pointed up the mountain towards the shack. That's where they took him." And then when they got right up in front of the shack, what they saw was so gruesome and horrible. 3 weeks earlier, while Bill was urinating in that alleyway, Mark spoke to that girl he wanted to see, and then she went off. And while he was waiting, two men jumped out from behind a building and tried to grab Mark and put him inside of this red truck. Mark was a very fit, big, athletic guy, and so he was able to fight the two men off, but he only made it about 2 blocks when another car full of gangsters showed up and then at point got him to come into the second vehicle. They drove him up into the mountains to this secluded ranch. This gang that had abducted Mark was more like a cult, and this cult was led by a man named Constanzo, who practiced a form of black magic called Palo. These rituals, which took place in the shack, involved human sacrifice. Constanzo would tell his followers that these people who were going to be sacrificed, they needed to die screaming. The more agony he inflicted on his victims, the more power the gods would grant to he and his followers. After Mark was led out of the vehicle, he was walked up to that shack where he spent several horrifying hours with Constanzo and his cronies, and then at some point Mark was killed when a machete was brought down on the back of his neck. Mark's body was one of 15 discovered in and around this shack. Constanzo had his followers shoot and kill him before the police could get to him. 5 other cult members were ultimately convicted for their roles in the cult's murders, and they were each given a sentence of over 60 years in prison.